Welcome. In today's lesson, we're going to create a pivot table. A pivot table is data that's grouped into a set. That data looks like a combination of a table and an outline. In order to create a pivot table, we've got to have data. I have created some data for us earlier. This is simply a sales chart for the Airspace Travel Company for sales data for a 3-month period for each of the sales people. I'm going to select the Insert tab and the Pivot Table button. Excel is going to guess where my rate data is held, so it's held in cells A3 through I-89, and I'm going to insert my pivot table into a new worksheet. I'll select OK. This is the area where the pivot table will appear once created, and here are the fields that I can add to the pivot table. So if you select by putting a check mark into any of those fields, such as location, Excel decides where that might best fit, and in this case it's chosen to put it into rows. I also want to sort this pivot table by position. I'd like to know which months these sales were made, and finally I'd like to know the sales dollars that were made. Now there's my pivot table. However, it's not a very attractive pivot table, and it's a little difficult to read because it's so long I have to scroll way down to row 49 to get all of it in. This is one of the beautiful things about a pivot table. I can quickly rearrange this data. For instance, if I took the location field and selected it or pushed it into the columns, I keep agents, managers, and the grand total. However, that data for months or locations is pushed into columnar format. I can quickly move it back if it's not where I want, or perhaps I want to sort by position in columns, so I'll move that over there. Perhaps I want positions and locations to be in columnar format, with positions being secondary to locations. So I'll just push that one up. Not exactly what I was looking for, so I'm going to push locations back over. I'm going to push months to the columns. I'm going to push positions back over, and that's usable data. That looks pretty good. Okay, in addition to creating the pivot table, I want to format the data in the pivot table to more accurately reflect what the data is. This data is currency. So I'll select in the values field the sum of sales button, drop my arrow down, and I can choose the value field settings here. I want to number format the data to reflect currency. So I'll select the currency button here, and I'll apply 0 decimal places to this data by selecting OK. And OK again. Now this data looks like currency for me. I'm going to close my Pivot Tables Fields button. If you decide to change your data in any way, you can push that back up. I can highlight or hide some of the data so that I only have the totals. For instance, if I click this minimize button here next to agent, I only have totals. But if I want to specifically highlight something like the Los Angeles area and the manager totals, I would need to do that with a slicer. I'm going to select the Insert button. I'm going to select the Slicer button. From here, I want to select and slice this data up according to location and also according to position. I'm going to select OK, and because I chose 2 methods or 2 areas to slice the data, Excel gives me 2 slicer boxes. Anytime I want to slice data, I can simply click on a button to slice that specific data. For instance, if I want to pull out the New York data, I'll select New York here, and I only want to look at the manager sales data for New York. I'll select this button here, and now I have an absolutely new pivot chart. This chart has been filtered or sliced. The way I would remove those slicers and unhide the data would be simply to select Remove Filters here or here to remove the filter from the slicer. In addition to pivot tables and slicers, I can create pivot charts from the data that's displayed here. If I select the Insert button once again and the recommended chart types, Excel comes right to the front and gives me a recommended chart type. I'm going to select the OK button, and now you'll see that I have a specific chart for that data. I'm going to zoom out and then reposition that chart so that it's just below the pivot table as well. And now you'll see a pivot table with slicers. If I reslice